So I got involved with Valley's Kids really first as a volunteer around the 1990s. I came here because I was working for a theatre company, and when I was here I loved the place and I said I'm going to come back. So I came here and I worked part-time for another organisation, but I run a little youth theatre, and then I worked as a volunteer for a number of years. Then in 1996 I took a kind of full-time job and I came here as a full-time member of staff.
Cool. So has Valley's Kids done anything to help you personally as well as a person?
Absolutely, it has. I mean, I don't think that anyone would stick around. I mean, I'm not from the Valleys, so, you know, I was passionate about the Valleys as a place. I also was passionate about its kind of politics and its history and that side of it. So I knew quite a lot about the Valleys before I ever rocked up. So it isn't sort of accidental that I came here. But I think above all, what Valley's Kids gave me was a place where I could practice in the way that I really wanted to practice. And that's, you know, my background is in theatre and drama and arts. But I was passionate about the idea of young people being in a position to be able to create and make their own work and their own stories. And that's what I really wanted to do. And what I loved about Valley's Kids is if you came with a really good idea and you were passionate and you demonstrated that you could do that work, then they would help you and support you to do it. But the other thing is, along the way, all the kind of people, including like the founders, Margaret, Richard, Pauline, were all incredibly influential because I didn't know much about community development work. That wasn't my background. I think that Margaret and Richard taught me a lot about the sort of overall context. And Pauline was like my almost like day-to-day mentor. So she was the person who I would go to if I wanted to find out about youth work and I wanted to find out, and all my mistakes and a lot of crying in the early days where, you know, the kids would go wild and I didn't know what to do. A lot of that was Pauline, who kind of like sat me down and really taught me how to do youth arts in a community development setting. Margaret and Richard were just amazing in terms of opportunities. They would listen to me, they would take me places. You know, I would help give them mad plans that I wanted to do. Like, I want to take a whole bunch of kids up to Lancaster, you're going to have to drive all night, then you're going to have to drive me back in the morning. And to my absolute amazement, they would kind of get on board. I want to go to Barcelona, I want to take a group of kids, you have to drive the minibus at silly o'clock. And they were up for it and they did it. So yeah, that's in that way, they, you know, I didn't even drive at that time, so they were invaluable. But while they were doing all of that stuff, they were really passing on their knowledge, their expertise and everything that they had learned along the way. You know, and it was obviously a project that I felt passionate about. And I guess all the other people, like for me, it's the whole thing has been about learning from other people. So like the Julie Spillers of this world, when I went to Panaranglan, Erica, in Ballin. The great thing about the project that I did, Sparc, is that I went to all the projects. So whereas, you know, people were very embedded in their areas, then the likes of people like, you know, the Debs and Kaths, who were based very much in Penagwraig, were really helpful, really knew their stuff. I could kind of dip in and out of that. But I guess along the way, you know, the two people in the very early days who we kind of learnt together, and, you know, obviously one of them is now my husband, full disclosure. And let's not go there. But Dave and Rog were like my sort of partners in crime, and they were the people who we were in the trenches, if you like, and occasionally it did feel like we were in the trenches. So I did a lot of stuff in Penagwraig, and then as Sparc, or as it was initially called, Artworks grew, I went and worked in all the different projects, and everywhere I went, I'm a bit of a borrower. I picked up a lot of knowledge and expertise, but I guess more than anything else, the young people I work with were the real people who taught me how to do the work, you know. So yeah, pretty much everyone I came in contact with, I learned something from.
Yeah. So obviously it was Artworks and now it's Sparc.
Yes.
So can you just tell us a little bit about the journey and the difference between Artworks and Sparc?
I mean, really, there's not a massive amount. I'll explain why it became from one to the other. But essentially, when I turned up at Valley's Kids, this is a little bit my version of Margaret and Richard's coal cellar story. When I turned up here, I was told that I'm going to work with a group of young people, and I was working for Spectacle Theatre at the time, which is amazing because Spectacle are still going strong and they're at the factory, and I was working with people like Steve and Roz in those days, and they'd already made this decision that they really wanted a youth theatre, but actually they had thought that we would do like a scripted piece, and I turned up and I had some possible scripts and things like that, and I just realised that it wasn't going to work with the group of young people I was working with, and they didn't respond to that work. They didn't really want to do that work because part of them, there was a lot of fear around reading and writing, literacy and those sorts of things, and I just thought, right, I'm going to ditch it and I'm going to actually get them to make up their own stuff. And really, that's what we did. That was my background in theatre and education. And companies like Spectacle, that's what we did. And I just thought, well, why don't we do that? And essentially what we did is we started working on stories that interested them. And I would say whether it's Artwork, Sparc, early work, that bit hasn't changed. But what did happen is that the project started to really develop its own sort of identity. And there was quite a simple thing with Artworks, which is that around that time, there was a big organisation. We'd never registered the name, and they were called Artworks. And they were based, they then had a base in Wales, and they were funded by Paul Hamlin Foundation. And it got really confusing. I'd go to a conference and I'd be like, we're Valley's Kids Artworks, not Artworks Cymru. And there was also another national organisation, because it was a great name. And I thought it was original, but it wasn't. Although we did have it before Artworks Cymru, another full disclosure. So then I just thought, do you know what? I think we need to change. But with that change, it felt like we'd reached a point where we'd really developed. Because the young people, when I started out, it was a project that I'd put together, and I was supporting people and I was doing the work with a group of people who really I'd bought in from, none of us were actually from the valleys at that point. But my desire and my interest was, could I get young people interested enough in this work to actually end up running and developing the project? And that had happened, and it felt like, let's really mark that identity. But also I had another generation of young people coming through, and they were really confident. And the other side of it was, we needed a better brand. We needed a better identity. It's always scary to make a change, but I thought it was the brave thing to do. And that way as well, I didn't choose Sparc. I didn't choose the name. We had a proper process, and the young people got together and they worked with this amazing organisation, Web Design. And they also designed a really beautiful website which sold our story. And they actually, it actually wasn't my first choice, but it was the right choice. They chose Sparc, and it felt like it kind of embedded us in that idea that we had arrived. And it also just meant that it was easier and better, on the back of that. Esme Fairbairn funded us for another couple of years, having funded us for like 9 years, because they felt that we had really made this big shift. So it was a hard decision to make. And now, of course, the young people don't know it as anything else.
Yeah. Why do you think Valley's Kids is important to the communities that they're in?
I think it's funny, isn't it? I think the importance and why it's important does change during different times. I think when I came, it was a really tough time. I mean, throughout this entire journey with Valleys Kids, really the disadvantage in the Valleys hasn't changed. I think there was a period of time when there were, when we had a different government, a Labour government at that time, where you could see that there was a bit of a sea change of people investing in the Valleys. And I think Valleys Kids were very fortunate in a way to be able to really capitalise on that, and with Communities First funding, also a different kind of sea change with Europe. So there were times when the funding felt like it really came on board. But did that really, that's the big $24 billion question. Did that really shift and change poverty on the ground in the Valleys? But what Valleys Kids did for the people who came in contact with Valleys Kids is it gave so many people in the community the opportunity to create change for themselves. That's the way I see it. And I think what it also did is it allowed people, I think some of the things that it's really worth thinking about, especially as someone who's an outsider, because lots of people who will be interviewed are from the Valleys and endlessly fascinated with the Valleys, even though they're from the Valleys. And I think sometimes it's useful to think about people coming in a little bit and helping shift perspectives. I think we didn't just do that with people like myself coming and working here. I think Valleys Kids also was quite innovative and quite exciting in the way that they made connections and got people involved with things that they probably wouldn't have got involved in. So it's kind of a funny sort of mixture. I think some of the things that the organisation is absolutely so important to the community is that they're there day in, day out, and that they are consistent, and that people know that they can come, and in some ways that certain activities just feel like they're absolutely embedded and they're not going to change, and you went to them and your child can come to them, and those people are always going to be there for you. And then there's another bit of Valleys Kids which is about also introducing people to things that maybe they didn't do or they never really thought about. And I guess from my perspective in the arts, what that did is it allowed young people to kind of like really express how they felt about what was going on to a bigger audience. So I think one of the things that we did really successfully with things like projects like Tate Exchange or Mzansi, or these big projects that we had, we enabled people to platform the Valleys outside of the Valleys as well. And I think that was important, but it wouldn't have worked if you hadn't had those people. And I always understood that without the youth workers and the play workers who were there week in, week out, the other stuff doesn't really work. It doesn't really take root. But I think that's what created that kind of like opportunity for change. So if you wanted to do something and you felt that this was a place you could come to and you could make something happen for yourself, and you could also make something happen with other people, for other people, and I think that's what's been incredible about it.
Is there anything that stands out of the best bit of your job or whatever that you've done?
I think all the bits, I think sometimes the bits that I've absolutely loved are not necessarily the bits that are the most showy. I think if you think about Sparc, you would be like, wow, you've done some really amazing and impressive stuff. And that's really been exciting and important. But I guess I have a memory of one of the young people who did go to Tate. And actually, there was nothing to do with the fact that she was doing anything to do with drama or theatre. She was sat by a window and I went over to her and she just was looking out of this window onto the centre of London, and I said to her, "Are you all right?" Because she was very sort of, into herself, and I just wanted to chat, quite dreamy. And she said, "I'm just drinking it in, Miranda." And I think that those little moments when I felt like someone's really, I could feel the impact. So I would say there's lots of moments like that along the way, but it's those little moments that for me like really matter. Like, yeah, not so much what we do in order to demonstrate to the, I know that sounds contradictory in terms of what I've said before. It is important to get our message out there, but perhaps the most important thing is when we feel it in ourselves, like we know ourselves that something really important is happening to us. So yeah, that's the bits that I love.
Yeah.
The project I loved the most were the projects where the people who were involved in those projects were shaping them and making them. And sometimes they weren't necessarily the bigger projects, they were like the little things that happened on the ground. And I think also sometimes it was more the little moments. I mean, there's so many funny things that have happened, and like, moments when I was sort of cutting my teeth and I was learning about it. I guess the other thing that gives me a lot of pleasure, so if I say about like memories, but is actually thinking of all the people who've come through. Like when I was doing this project for Valley's Voices, the amount of people that you wanted to interview because you knew that they would have something to say. And it gives me a lot of pleasure thinking about those people. I love to think, and I like the fact that sometimes those people have kind of drifted off and then they sort of come back when they're ready. And I'm a great believer in that. I don't think that we always, there's a little bit of a Valleys thing which is like kind of you have to, like you could never leave because otherwise you're betraying the Valleys. And I believe that you can leave and you can come back. And I think that's quite an important message for people, and I love that. When someone's worked with us for a little while, they drift off, they do other things, and then they kind of find their way back when they want to. Yeah, so I'm in favour of that. I mean, it is a tough time, and I think there's almost like two avenues that I feel. I think that there's the avenue where we make it through, and I think that for me, it feels really important. I'll being absolutely honest, I think it's much more important that we keep something really valuable. So like when we're looking at buildings, I always want to think that people come first. So, and where does people's history reside? So when I'm thinking about a building, it's like and I'm thinking about a project like Valley's Voices, where is the history contained? For me, I would say that, that will be different for different people, but this is the place where it all started. So Saw is the place where it all started. I don't know if we'll be able to hang on to everything, but it feels really important that we hang on to something. And my thing about the future is the world is changing all the time. And we're going through a crisis, not just in Valley's kids, but in my view, these are my opinions, the world is in crisis. So that crisis is not resolved yet, and things could change very, very fast. And if there's something left to build on, whether that's Penrhenglan, whether that's here, whether it's both, if there's something here that can be rebuilt on or reimagined, I think that's going to be really important. So I really hope that we can do that so that people in a different time can rebuild. And my hope would be that once people had their heads knocked together and realised how important these kinds of projects are in a community, that they would embrace it, back it in the way that sometimes they did, like in those periods that I'm talking about, where funding was a lot more, wasn't so scarce. And then there's another part of me that is like nothing lasts forever. Nothing. So there's another thing where I think that we also should accept that Valley's Kids is in people. And I think with me, I've learnt that, some, people like Ian, for example, who went off and worked at the Arts Council, or Claire, who's working in Children in Wales, they still carry Valley's kids with them. And they still, I mean, you know, Ian still does work with us here, but they carry a lot of that ethos and that way of working. But so do all the local people in lots of local ways. And I don't think we can always know. I know funders love impact, but we do know impact, and we can measure impact, and we can talk about it, but we don't know everything. So in some ways, if people went on to reimagine a Valley's kids in the way that they wanted it to be, and that might look more like it did in the past, or it might be that they go and build a different project, and to me, I'm not wedded. That's okay. That's okay. It's not about it's not about me. It's about what's needed.
Brilliant. Hapus iawn. Is there anything else you think of that you would like to talk about?
I guess I would like to say a thank you, you know, to all the people who have made up that kind of journey. And sometimes I think, how the hell did I end up here, and how the hell did I stay so long? And I'm sure that's a story that is going to be told in many different ways. But really, I'm old enough now to know I don't have regrets about that stuff. So I guess, like, all those people, I sometimes think of us as like a big, crazy, dysfunctional family. And we're not all perfect, and we haven't been perfect along the way, but we have done some incredible and remarkable things. So I just think we should have real gratitude for that, and I certainly do, for the people who I've met along the way, from the people then. And I think maybe we just also need to recognise and understand that actually this work does continue, and there are remarkable people who are still doing it. And sometimes we don't focus quite enough on those people who are kind of that future. So yeah, that would be it.
Brilliant, thank you very much.